In March of 2020, esteemed country musician Joe Diffie became the first notable figure in the country music scene to pass away as a result of complications from COVID-19. Conspiracy theorists lined up in droves to try to prove it was actually some other medical issue, but the musician's widow confirmed firsthand it was indeed COVID-19. Join Facts First as Joe Diffie's widow confirms his true cause of death. Joe Diffie's death caught the world off guard. When Joe Diffie passed away in March of 2020 at age 61, it caught the world of country music off guard. He was an esteemed figure in the world of country music, though he hadn't had a big hit in nearly 2 decades. He remained a beloved member of the Grand Ole Opry until his passing, and had recently celebrated his 25th anniversary as an Opry member with a gigantic concert at the venue. Though he was no longer a success on the charts, he was still a legend in his corner of the world. While Diffie's death would have rocked the world of country music on its own, there's also the fact of the matter that Joe became one of the first notable figures in the country music scene to pass away from complications related to COVID-19. His death occurred towards the beginning of the pandemic. Unsurprisingly, there were numerous conspiracy theorists who came out of the woodwork following Joe's passing to try to prove the country music legend died of something else, but his widow has recently proven them wrong. How Joe Diffie became a star. Joe was born the 28th of December 1958 in Tulsa, Oklahoma. Early on, he set his sights on becoming a factory worker, something he considered a more reasonable goal than being a famous country music star. But he was laid off from his factory job in the 80s. He took this as a sign to reignite his vague dreams of stardom. He packed his bags and headed to Nashville in the hopes of striking it big. It didn't take long for the burgeoning Joe Diffie to make a name for himself in country music. In the daytime, Joe paid the bills by working at Gibson's Guitar Factory. When he had free time, Joe could be found laying down demo tracks of his own compositions. His first success in the country music industry came as a songwriter. The first hit song he wrote was "There Goes My Heart Again," recorded by artist Holly Dunn. It wasn't long after this that Joe was given a chance to shine on his own, receiving his own record contract. He signed with Epic Records around the cusp of the 90s and scored his big first hit with the label in the form of the 1990 single Home. From there, he grew in popularity until he was one of the biggest names in the industry. The peak of his success came in the mid-90s after the release of his album Honky Tonk Attitude. That album went on to become Joe's first platinum record. His follow-up, Third Rock from the Sun, also achieved platinum status. He had a handful of gigantic hit songs, including the latter album's title track. Another of his popular songs around that time was called Bigger Than the Beatles. While Joe was far from being more popular than the Beatles, he was certainly as big as them in the world of country music. Joe Diffie almost didn't record his biggest song. Another one of Joe's most popular songs is John Deere Green, which the country music legend almost didn't perform. When he had broken out as a songwriter, he wasn't afraid to sing songs written by other people once he became a big star. John Deere Green was written by fellow country music legend Dennis Lind, and Joe initially balked at the prospect of including the song on his aforementioned Honky Tonk Attitude. According to Diffie, he had to be convinced to perform the song in the studio. Even after recording it, he still wasn't convinced it would be a good fit. Thankfully, he was talked into including the song, and it stands today as one of his biggest hits. Before we tell you more about Joe Diffie, be sure to give this video a like and subscribe to Facts First if you haven't already. Joe Diffie only won 1 Grammy Award. In 1999, Joe Diffie won his first and only Grammy. He won for country collaboration with vocals. He won for the song Same Old Train, which also featured beloved country music stars such as Marty Stewart, Emmylou Harris, Merle Haggard, and Alison Krauss. Joe had been nominated in the category once previously, thanks to the song Not Much to Ask. He recorded that classic country collaboration with Mary Chapin Carpenter in 1992. While one might have assumed Joe Diffie's first Grammy Award win meant the star's future was brighter than his past, Joe actually found himself losing much of his star status around the new millennium. Joe's last big hit was called In Another World, released in 2001. After that, he continued recording and performing up until his recent death, but to significantly decreased avail. While he was no longer one of the biggest names in the country music scene during the 2000s, the new stars coming out of the woodwork still had a lot of respect for him. Jason Aldean had a hit song with 1994, and it featured plenty of references to Joe Diffie. Did Joe really pass away from COVID-19? His final album ended up being 2013's All in the Same Boat. it was a modest success, and many felt Joe was on the verge of a career revival. He released a few successful singles in 2018 and was said to have been working on a brand new album around the time of his passing. In January of 2019, Diffie played a gigantic concert at the Grand Ole Opry in celebration of being a member for 25 years. The concert also featured some of his fellow country music legends, including Vince Gill, Michael Ray, and Ricky Skaggs. It seemed that Joe had a lot of life left in him, but sadly he passed away only a little over a year later. Since the passing of Joe Diffie, several other notable country musicians have passed away from COVID-19. These include Jan Howard, Kenny Rogers, and John Prine. Given that Joe was one of the first major victims of COVID-19, many people refused to believe it was the true causing of his passing. His passing came towards the beginning of the pandemic, and many people were still trying to downplay how serious of an issue COVID-19 was. Many conspiracy theorists came out of the woodwork to try to prove the musician had died from other causes. Several said he had actually passed away from lung cancer, but that his death had been used by the powers that be to convince the world COVID-19 was a serious issue. The conspiracy theorist allegedly turned up an obituary for a man named Joe Diffie who had passed away from cancer in 2018. This was, of course, a different Joe Diffie. It had been for Joe Diffie Sr., who had passed away a little over a year before his son. In 2002, Diffie released a greatest hits compilation called 16 Biggest Hits. Following the country music legend's passing in 2020, it re-entered the charts, proving that Joe will live on through his music. Though Joe didn't have many big hits towards the latter end of his life, he left behind a legacy in the country music world that won't be forgotten for some time. Now it's time to hear from you. What's your favorite Joe Diffie song? Let us know in the comments section below. And before you go, make sure you give this video a like and subscribe to Facts First if you haven't already. Click the bell icon to stay updated on all our latest content. By the way, if you haven't joined Facts First as a member yet, be sure to look below this video and click the join button. By becoming a paid member of Facts First, you'll get access to exclusive video content that you won't find anywhere else. This includes some of our more mature content that isn't suitable for public audiences, which includes topics like Hollywood actresses who posed for Playboy and some of the steamiest moments in movie history. Plus, you can enjoy these videos completely ad-free. Our biggest fans will notice they also get badges next to their name when they leave comments on our videos. We pay special attention to comments from our members, and so do other viewers. So if you want exclusive content from Facts First or inside access to discussions with other community members, click the join button to get started for just $4.99. There are hours of members-only videos waiting for you, with new videos added every month. And we're actively working on bringing even more features to help fans like you connect with other members and get more of your favorite content. Just click join, and we'll see you inside the membership tab.